What separates a great product from an average product at the same price? Write your answer to that question in the comments down below. I'll share some thoughts on that from myself in a little while when I talk about where I think the Eytse P60 speaker amp fits into the scheme of being a great product or an average product. But first, let me tell you a bit about it. And I should begin by telling you that Eytse, I think that's how you might say it, they sent me the P60 for review, but they have no influence over this video. At its $140 list price, the Eytse P60 speaker amp is in the same vein as other options from brands like Fosi Audio with the ZA3 or the V3 stereo amp, or from another brand like FX Audio with the L07. The P60 is compact, it's pretty simple, and it will output a quoted maximum figure of 300 watts. That's into 8 ohms, I believe. Realistically, it's only going to deliver about 65 watts continuously into 8 ohm speakers, or it'll jump up to 78 watts into 4 ohm speakers. That is still plenty for most situations, but it's far from the claim on paper of 300 watts. Those numbers I just quoted are with the 32 volt power supply that comes with the P60, but you can also upgrade the power supply to a 48 volt one, and that's going to increase your power output significantly. That 48 volt power supply would have to be bought separately, at least on Amazon. There's no sign of it being bundled in with the P60. And so the version that I've tested here, what was sent to me, is just the 32 volt power supply version. And then when you take a look at the P60 on paper, in terms of its specifications and features, nothing jumps out as exceptional. As I already said, it's very similar to many other speaker amps of a similar price on the market today. It has similar power output. It uses the same TPA3255 amplifier chip. It's even got swappable op amps like many of the other options such as Fosi Audio. Where it's a little bit different to some of the other options is that it does have Bluetooth 5.3, but it's limited only to the SBC and the AAC codecs. So you're not going to get the high quality Bluetooth codecs here like aptX HD, aptX Adaptive or LDAC. It's enough and it's fine, but it could have been even better. Then there are also a pair of tone controls on the front of the P60, which is a nice touch. Again, not completely unique, but maybe a little bit different to some of the competitors. And those will give you a plus or minus 14 decibel boost or cut on the bass, and a plus or minus 6 decibel boost or cut on the treble. Just do be aware that there's no central notch. There's no place that feels like the midpoint or the neutral point on those bass and treble dials. So when you do come back and you want to bring it back to neutral, you kind of have to just make sure you line up the dash on the knob to be exactly at the 12 o'clock position. It's not a big deal, but some other products like those from say Fosi Audio tend to give you a nice clear stop point at that neutral 0 position. And then if we talk about one other thing that's quite different about the P60, that would be its design. I was really impressed with the look of the P60. Yes, the faceplate is pretty straightforward and bland, but I love this clear top plate. You can see all the components inside, including whichever op amps are in there, including whichever op amps you've put in there if you've chosen to swap them, and it's all illuminated by some blue LED strip lights along each side underneath the lid. Of course, if you're not a fan of blue LEDs, that's not going to be so good because you can't turn them off, but for everybody else, I think it looks really nice. And so now is probably a good time to revisit the question at the beginning of the video. What makes a product at the same price better and therefore great compared to the competitors, or just average and like all the rest of its competitors? I'm sure some of you said down below that sound quality is king. Others might have said the features that it offers. Some might have said the looks or the interface. Of course, it's probably a little bit of all of these for all of us, but the exact combination of what you prioritize first and foremost could be different from person to person. For me, it's sound quality first and foremost. Or perhaps I should go a step further than saying sound quality. It's musical engagement. It's whether the amp makes me want to sit down and listen to more music, or if it just delivers the music that I've asked it to play. Some amps out there, you switch them on and you never want to switch them off. You just want to keep listening and listening and listening. That to me is the sign of a great product, and they exist at every single price point. And that to me is where the Eytse P60 just fails to differentiate itself a little bit. It's a really nice sounding amp. It's affordable and it's simple in a good way. There's nothing to complain about at all here. The problem is, as I've already mentioned, there are so many other options in exactly the same vein. Fosi V3, Fosi ZA3, Aiyima A70, FX Audio L07, 3E Audio A7, although that does cost a bit more. The list could probably go on, but my memory's failing me. Every single one of those amps that I mentioned, and all of the ones that I forgot to mention, are equally as good and just as enjoyable and just as capable as the Eytse P60. But the key point for me is that none of them are clearly better than the others. And the P60, as you've already gathered, fits right into that description. That also means that the P60 faces the same problem as the rest of those amps do. And that is that for just $100 or so US more than the price of each of these solid but generally mediocre amplifiers, you could buy an amp that is so much more enjoyable in the form of the SMSL Raw HA1. The Raw HA1 costs $250 so it is more expensive, but out of the box with no fiddling, no op-amp rolling, it just sounds so much better. With the P60's swappable op-amps, you can get the P60 to match or even beat the Raw HA1. For example, if you swap in something like the Sparkos Labs SS3602 op-amps, which by the way are about the only boutique op-amps that will fit inside the P60 because of the placement of the sockets and the capacitors around them. But if you do install those Sparkos 3602s into the P60, it sounds wonderful. It produces a more spacious sound than the HA1, and that's both in terms of the width of the soundstage, but also the separation of the individual notes within the soundstage. Unfortunately, even with the better op-amps, there's still not very much depth to be heard. For example, the drum solo in Last Tango in Paris, the drums are spread right across the front of the stage. You're not going to get that sense of layering or even positioning of the drum kit back in space. However, that might be the only real drawback. Once you upgrade the P60 with the Sparkos Labs SS3602s, the sense of timbre or tonality of the amp also gets an upgrade and sounds fantastic. Very natural, very true to life. And I'd say that with the Sparkos Labs installed in the P60, it delivers a sound that's not quite as thick as the Raw HA1, which is not a thick sounding amp to begin with, but it was remarkable how the P60 just opened up the sound. It made everything sound more available, as I said before, more true to life. And so, as you've probably gathered, with the Sparkos Labs 3602 op-amps in the P60, it is a wonderful sounding amplifier. Very enjoyable, highly engaging, and quite Moorish like I described before. But there is a catch here. The Eytse P60 speaker amp with 4 Sparkos Labs 3602 op-amps is going to cost you significantly more than the SMSL Raw HA1. And on top of that, it is a little bit of a hassle to install the op-amps. Of course, you could go for cheaper op-amps like an OPA 1656 for instance, but if you do that, you're more likely to maybe match the sound of the SMSL Raw HA1 as opposed to go beyond it like you can with the Sparkos. And so at that point, you have to question if it's worth buying the P60 and then some op-amps like the OPA 1656s to end up at the same price as an amplifier you could take out of the box brand new and have it already sound the same way, i.e. fantastic. And so to me, the P60 is really just another compact, affordable, and good sounding speaker amp. It's not particularly different from all of the other compact, affordable, and good sounding speaker amps. And that raised an important question. What if you don't want to spend over $200, whether it's in buying an amp like the P60 and then a bunch of op-amps, or going straight to something like the SMSL Raw HA1? What if you want to keep your costs down and your hassles down too? What is the best amp under $200? Which one should you buy? I was thinking the P60 was actually a strong option based on my early tests. Not because it sounded vastly better than any of the alternatives, but I felt it was one of the nicer options to interact with and see sitting on your bench. But it did still have one major competitor to beat, a competitor that I deliberately haven't mentioned until right now. The Fosi Audio MC331 costs $10 less than the P60's full list price. It trades the glass top of the P60 and its blue LED lights for tubes, orange accents, and a real analog VU meter. It's not quite as powerful as the P60 if that's important to you, but unless you're in a larger room sitting a fair way back from the speakers, or you have particularly low sensitivity speakers, the MC331 is likely going to be enough for most people. As to which one sounds better? That's pretty easy. The MC331 produces a sound that is properly holographic. It brings the music to life in a way that none of these other budget amps that I've tried seem to manage. There's a guitar solo in the middle of Like Someone in Love, and it sounded really nice from the P60, but it just didn't have the sense of bounce and life that the MC331 brought to the exact same track, with the exact same source chain. And so if you're looking for the best sounding amplifier that you're not going to fiddle with, you're just going to take it out of the box, plug it in and listen to it, and you want to spend less than $150, then I would always steer you towards the Fosi Audio MC331. However, this is not a review of the MC331, this is a review of the Eytse P60, and so I should stress that the P60 is a really nice amp for what it offers. As I said before, it's a bit more powerful than the MC331 if you need that extra grunt, and it's also fairly easy to swap the op amps around if you want to. The hardest part's going to be getting the volume knob and the bass and treble knobs off to get to the little nuts underneath. Once you do that, and you unscrew the 2 screws on either side at the back and the 2 screws underneath the P60, it's going to be very easy to slide the board in and out, swap the op amps and see what you like. And so as far as affordable speaker amps in that sub $200 category go, assuming we're sticking with solid state and therefore excluding the MC331, I think the P60 is right up there with the best of them. And that's especially true when you often see it on Amazon for just $100. As a $100 speaker amp, I think the P60 is fantastic. And so if that sounds good to you, I've got links in the description down below where you can pick up the P60 for yourself. Or if you'd prefer the musical engagement I described with the MC331, I've pinned my review of that one here at the end, so you can watch that one next. For now though, I want to send a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and of course to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.